Okay.
Hi, and welcome everyone back to the Virtual Capacity Europe 2020. It's great to be able to have connected with you over the last few days. We really appreciate you joining us for this session and for all of the sessions over the last few days. You've joined the New Age of African Subsea Projects, Trends and Opportunities. Before we get started in just a moment, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who have supported Capacity Europe this year. We really appreciate their partnerships. Please do feel free to drop by their stands and say hello, set up meetings. The platform will remain open for the next 30 days, so you've still got an opportunity to do that if you haven't done so yet. Here's our lineup of fantastic speakers for this session. Before I hand over to the speaking session's moderator, Dobek Pater, who's the telecoms analyst from Africa Analysis, I would just like to remind you that you can pop your comments and questions for the panel in the live chat box next to your screen. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Dobek. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us in the session on the new age of African subsea cables. So we're going to have a look at latest developments, what's being planned in terms of additional submarine capacity, international capacity in and out of Africa. Projects, trends, and some of the opportunities that it will bring, and what exactly is it going to mean for the users, both consumer and business users on the African continent, and for things such as competition, and specifically within the subsea cable industry. We've got 4 industry captains, as they say, from the African telecommunications market, and specifically also focusing on the subsea cable and the data center environment. We've got Mr. Arthur Mendes with us. He's the VP for sales from Angola Cables, a cable system connecting Southern Africa to the Americas. We've got Byron Klitterbach. He's the CEO of Seacom, an independent cable system on the east coast of Africa, but also providing services on the west coast, other parts of Africa. The first one actually to land as an independent cable and a competitor to the incumbent Telkom in South Africa back in 2009. And Ricardo Orchero, he's in charge of network investments for the subsea segment in the EMEA region for Facebook. And then on the data center front, we've got Ranjit Cherikel. He's the CEO of iColo, an independent DC data center in East Africa, Kenya specifically. So we've got a good representation of the industry that we are focusing on today. I'd like to ask each one of the panelists to maybe just spend a minute to tell us a little bit about themselves, what they do and what the companies do as far as participation in the market goes. And if we could start sort of in the order that I just introduced them, starting with Arthur and then carrying on to Byron, Ricardo, and Ranjit.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity of participating in this panel. Arthur Mendes, with Angola Cables for almost 8 years these days, VP of Sales. Angola Cables is essentially a submarine cables wholesale capacity that participate in WOX, the West African cable system, being one of the anchor investors in that cable, and also then building a South Atlantic cable system connecting Angola to Brazil, and participating together with other players in the construction of Monet connecting Brazil to United States, and also building data centers in Angola and also in Brazil. So in a nutshell, this is what we have been doing recently.
Byron, over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Byron Clatterbuck, the CEO of Seacom. And as you mentioned, Seacom was a project that was constructed over about 2 years and went live in 2009. I've been with Seacom for about 8 years, 8.5 years now. And I think importantly, as we get into the topics, we're no longer just a subsea cable company. We're very much a service provider company, moving more and more into corporate and enterprise services while we still support our service provider partners and customers. And I think that does mean a change in what we do and how we do it when we talk about terrestrial networks and improving access into landlocked countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go with Ranjit. You're on mute, Ranjit. It would be great to hear your voice.
I only work for a data center company. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ranjit. I'm the founder of Icolo. I've had the exciting privilege of trying to build infrastructure in Africa for the last 7-8 years. We started with Kenya. We have 2 data centers, one in Mombasa, specifically sort of catering to the new subsea systems coming in, and the other in Nairobi, which is sort of the eyeball hub of East Africa. We continue to look at new countries and places in Africa to build, and I think for us it's an extremely exciting time. We are playing catch up to some of my colleagues on the call here, where they've been building submarine systems. We are part of that first phase of inland infrastructure, and then hopefully the colleagues who are building further infrastructure on the fiber side, and all of this comes together very nicely over the next 10 to 15 years.
Ranjit and Ricardo.
Thank you, Pater. So I'm Ricardo Ortero. I'm working at Facebook almost since the last 7 years. I just focused primarily in looking at how we can connect our data centers to each other, our data center to our POPs, and I would say a new entrant into the subsea market, as our connectivity needs, our demand has been growing over the last 7 years. We now have such needs that justifies us getting involved in the development of new submarine cables, supporting the industry. We started with our first Facebook co-lead system, which was Marea on the transatlantic. But since then, we have been developing together with other carriers multiple submarine cables, not only in the transatlantic, as well trans-Pacific, and most recently in the Africa space.
Thank you very much for that. So, just to set the scene, we are talking and discussing subsea cables in Africa and the impact on the African connectivity environment, competition. Over the past several years, we have seen relatively little or limited activity in the subsea market, subsea cable market. I think particularly when it comes to new cables, and Angola Telecoms, Angola Cables is probably the exception. They're probably the best sort of cable build event that has taken place over the past several years, although other cable operators have been upgrading their capacity on the respective cables. Now, all of a sudden, we see 2 major cables already being constructed underway, and a number of others actually being planned, or at least reported. They claim that they will build. The 2 cables that are coming to Africa, 2 new cables, are from the global so-called over-the-top OTT players, big cloud providers. We've got the 2 Africa cable from Facebook, and Ricardo will speak a bit about that, I'm sure, and Equiano from Google. And they are effectively first major new cable build developments in the past several years. And one starts to wonder whether perhaps this is a new era of investment in the subsea cable infrastructure to and out of Africa and around Africa. So let's explore that a little bit. Ricardo, perhaps since you're here with a new cable build, if you can maybe update us a little bit on where the 2 Africa cable is and what exactly is the rationale for the cable.
Okay, no issue. But first thing I would like to do is, if you allow me, just clarify something. To Africa is not a Facebook cable. We are just one of 8 co-builders, co-investors into the subsea cable system. So it's a joint construction of 7 carriers together with Facebook, and the list of carriers includes 3 of the major mobile network operators in Africa, as is the case of Vodafone, MTN, and Orange. We have Telecom Egypt there, which has as well strong presence in the African continent, STC, which is a major player in the Middle East, and CMI, which is a major player in the Asian mobile market. So just wanted to clarify this to distinguish a little bit with other initiatives that are only led by one single company. I would say that the rationale for the To Africa cable definitely is the need of bringing more connectivity to the African continent. It's clear that with the transition of 2G to 4G networks, even 5G network trials are happening in Africa right now, the demand is going to increase. And as well, the need to reduce the digital divide of the African continent towards other continents. If you just allow me, just very simple math. Europe is 350 million population, has more than 16 transatlantic cables, petabyte capacity. African continent is what, 1.2 billion population, and has really less than 10% of the capacity that is connected today Europe to the US. So definitely there is a need, there is a demand, but we understand as well that some of the challenges of the African continent is the size of the continent itself. It's the largest continent. You can put the US, China, Europe, all inside Africa and still have room for adding more countries. It has the challenge as well that there's a lot of landings in the continent. It's not a linear point-to-point system as a transatlantic, so the level of investment required is higher to serve those countries. And then you have as well other major issues that you need to face, like how to connect the land-locked countries. So I hope that this gives you a summary of why the need of new cables connecting Africa.
Yes, it is, and yeah, thank you very much for the clarification. And my apologies, I should have mentioned it is a consortium actually. In fact, most cables in Africa and certainly in sub-Saharan Africa are consortia cables, rather and with operator stakeholders in it or investors rather than independent cables such as Seacom, for instance. But having said that, I mean, Facebook is still the odd one out, so to speak. I mean, you are not an operator telco per se. So what is the rationale for Facebook itself investing in a cable, and not only in Africa? I suppose we have the, as you said, the example in cross transatlantic example as well. I mean, why not just buy capacity from the operators who operate those cables?
Well, I believe that when you are one of the players that has a majority needs of capacity, it makes sense that you co-invest with operators and are able to serve your own traffic needs. Just if our traffic needs are beyond or at the level of 1 fiber pair, we believe that it is better that we just invest at the fiber level, and by adding more fibers to the system, share the risk of the construction with the operators, lower the cost of the operator at the fiber level, and contribute as well to the OPEX. So at the end, it's just a synergy between our needs and the operator needs. And the other thing that we see is that us bringing the volume of our traffic needs enables or makes easier the business case for operators and carriers to invest in a submarine cable.
Thanks very much. You brought up a number of important and interesting topics, and we'll touch probably on most of them as we go through the discussion. Byron, if I can turn over to you, and you're one of the operators that executes a fairly typical strategy of swapping capacity on routes or buying capacity from other cable operators, even competing cable operators, to allow for diversity of infrastructure. For instance, operators do that as well. They buy capacity, say the terrestrial operators, capacity multiple cables to ensure that there is no downtime or as little as possible. But exactly how many cables do we need in Africa for diversity? Are we going to continue building new cables just to add them to the list of cables we can have a little bit of capacity on, so that we feel more secure and service our clients?
Yeah,
is there
I think Ricardo hit on it. I think, in my mind, there'd be three reasons why you're seeing a building of new cables right now. One is, of course, there is the demand fact. The older cables, CCOM being RFS in 2009, Easy just behind it in 2010, WAX in 2012. So you have some of the high-speed, more open access cables in Africa aging. And the two new cables that have been announced, Equiano and To Africa, will take some time to deliver. So we're not expecting capacity to come online from Equiano until maybe 2022 and maybe a year later for To Africa. So there is that time lag before you announce and start to build before you actually can put that capacity into your network. So I think there is the need for capacity. There's also the need for diversity, which is absolutely critical. And I think, the landing sites, the diversity and the thought that's going into the new cables that are going on today are very diverse from existing paths as much as possible. In other words, they're different landing stations, different sites, using different backhaul, crossing in different places, et cetera, et cetera. So the second thing is cost, or third thing is cost. I think ultimately the size and scale of these new cables, CCOM's a 2 fiber pair systems, Easy's a 2 fiber pair system, WAX is a 4 fiber pair system. The new cables coming on are in the order of magnitude 3 times to 4 times that in terms of the number of fiber pairs, which again, maybe a little bit of a bigger investment up front, but then you have so much more capacity that your unit cost can come down. And I think that's quite critical as well for Africa going forward. So if you ask from a CCOM perspective, we were the original wholesaler and we started off as only a wholesaler. But now that we serve more and more corporates and enterprises and SMEs, and even now with WonderNet, our brand for fiber to the home, more and more customers, we have to build the most resilient, low-cost network we can. And that means we'll participate. Our choice has been we'll participate in Equiano, but certainly we will also get on To Africa, as you say, through reciprocal deals or swapping linear networks so that we build the most resilient network we can at the lowest possible cost.
Thanks for that. Arthur, Byron spoke about building at lowest possible cost, and the cost of building cables, especially the cost per, I suppose, the capacity and the potential, the design capacity and the lit capacity initially is decreasing in terms of cost per unit. Do you see that as as a scenario that may lead to almost a race to the bottom for the cable operators, as we saw years ago in the transatlantic region, where effectively operators will try to leverage decreasing cost to build cable in terms of as a cost per unit of capacity to start competing more aggressively on price? Or are we not going to see that scenario unfold in Africa, given the fact that prices in many markets have already come down quite significantly?
Yeah, it will put some pressure, at least in the old cables that have not at price levels because their cost of construction have been higher. So it will be 2 type of speeds and will not be able to make it equal to all African countries, because there's countries that have only been touched by old cables at old costs, structure and old prices. But let me probably move a bit before while you speak about the needs of Africa. It's true that Africa is the second biggest continent with 1.3 billion population, and at this stage, even being that is the fastest growing proportion of internet users, anyway, the levels of internet access is still very low, with 75% of the region's population still offline. And even if we see that growth and following a bit the global demand of more capacity, and also seeing new technologies that will help and push for that, like the upgrades of the networks from 3 to 4Gs, and then 5Gs that will appear at some stage, or the cloud and edge computing, or seeing the movements of the hyperscales and OTTs like Google's, Facebook's, and so on, of putting their contents in Africa and investing in data centers in Africa, that will create for sure a tremendous potential of growth that we have been telling that Africa had already. And there is still a big portion of the population, or 2/3 of the population, that needs to be addressed. As soon as that prices fall down, the prices of smartphones and computers and iPads and so on steps have been decreasing. Of course, that Africa being a very young population, they are eager to start using it. And there's big funds of revenues available to make it out of Africa that are still not there at this stage. So I do believe that decrease in price will really support the growth of usage in Africa, and that will keep the industry moving on and investing in new cables, and also the need of investing in new cables. Because some of the old cables that are there, imagine Sat3, for example, so they have, I don't know, 6-7 years to go. So until all of these projects like Equiano into Africa are ready, there's a few cables that are reaching their end of life, and they need to be replaced. And with the potential growth that we see, for sure that needs will be there. And the needs of decreasing the prices to be more and more competitive, and to support that increase of usage. Yeah.
Ranjit, from your perspective, you build data centers. Hopefully, they are getting filled at a rapid pace. From a terrestrial perspective on the ground, are you seeing that demand growing from just based on your data center experience? And what is your view on the growth of demand for database services over the next 5 to 10 years? And are we going to fill a lot of that capacity going forward on the subsea cables?
Yeah, I mean, I think without a doubt, the statistics that Ricardo mentioned is extremely powerful. But I think also, if you put it in perspective, with the population, 70% of the population below the age of 30, everybody will live on the internet. So it's a very large. So the question whether data will, do we have enough capacity, or are we building too much? I think a lot of this is gone in 5 to 6 years anyway. You'll have to think of new cable systems, which take a long time to sort of put together. We are seeing an incredible amount of increase in just general capacity on the network side in specific countries like Kenya. There's a lot of upgrades. There's quite a lot of capacity. When I moved to Kenya for the first time in 2011, if you had a few hundred kilometers of fiber in the ground, you were a very big operator. But I suspect a lot of the folks in Kenya are doing that much on a monthly basis now. And I think a big part of that is the fact that Kenya has had an open policy framework in place since 2000. So people are used to it. People are comfortable making the investments. And certainly, people are used to now using the internet for everything they sort of live with. So, will this, will we see an upgrade? There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, we're well past that discussion. I think the question is, how quickly will we run out of space in some of these systems that are being built now? They sound very ambitious, but I think certainly, I think you'll see that a lot of them will. I mean, I would even go to the extent of saying, because a lot of the systems here can only go forward if you build electronically, I think the story in Africa will be very different 15 years from what we have, what we see in Europe, because it is so embedded today. I mean, 6% of Kenya's GDP goes through M-Pesa today. I mean, that's a very large number, from a GDP perspective. So and that GDP is growing at 5 to 10% every year. So I mean, I definitely see the case for more investments, not just in data centers, but networks, subsea systems to continue at the rate that it is, and if perhaps even a little bit more.
Yeah, just to explain for those who may not be in the know and not know Africa that closely, M-Pesa is a mobile money payment effectively platform and system. I think the biggest in the world in terms of usage and the quantity or the volume of transactions and money that goes through it. Yeah, maybe bar China and the domestic solutions there. But Ranjit, you spoke about everybody effectively being connected to the internet, anyone that's under the age of 30 going forward. But it's also an issue of affordability. We still see quite a few countries, either landlocked countries or countries that don't have sufficient competition, such as possibly Ethiopia, for instance, in the telecom sector, where the affordability of data can be very limited for large segments of the population. So even though you'd like to live on the internet, perhaps you can only afford to live on the internet half an hour a day, and then they need to solve problems without the internet. Will the new, maybe Ricardo, question to you, will the new cables, not only to Africa and Equiano, but also other planned cables, I'm not quite sure what the status is, and some of them claim that they are progressing with the build, will they solve the problem of alleviating those constraints in some of the countries that still lag behind in terms of affordability or greater diversity of cables landing in them? Because when I look at the new cables being built, a lot of them, in fact, we target the same bigger markets in Africa. So they all come to South Africa because it's a good, convenient Southern African location between other continents like the Americas and Asia, for instance, or they go to Kenya on the East Coast, or they'll go to Nigeria and Senegal maybe on the West Coast. What happens to the other countries that have to do cross-border connectivity, sometimes at a great cost, to get to subsea international capacity, or have monopolies and a single cable maybe?
This is a good question. So, and I believe that there are different steps that need to happen in order to succeed. So I believe that one of the main differentiators we have to Africa is that we are connecting first time ever seamlessly East Coast and West Coast. East Africa is connecting 16 of the African countries all together. So it's not that we are only connecting Africa towards Europe, towards the Middle East, but just we are enabling first time ever those kind of connections. Other things that need to happen, as you have mentioned, is open access. So this is really a golden rule that we have at the Two Africa Consortia, that all the landings are going to be open access. What means open access is that cross connections to those cables are going to be fixed by the consortia and not only on an affordable, but on a non-discriminatory basis at all the landings. Whenever we can land directly at the Carrington data center, we are going to land at the Carrington data center. Otherwise, the cable landing stations where we're going to land are going to be governed under this open access, which I believe that is quite important, because that way any licensed operator in the country can access the capacity of the system. In the Two Africa, you have mentioned it's a consortia cable, but is a new model of consortia. Each party owns their fire pair, operates their fire pair independently. That means that we are enabling some way competition in the market by having multiple carriers bringing and competing to each other with their fibers in that particular market. There are as well a lot of initiatives in the countries we are landing just to develop their national broadband plans. We are just engaging with policymakers, regulators, to see if they are considering as well cross borders, meaning reach other neighbor countries. And I believe that putting all those things together, at that point, what we believe is that the landlocked countries will have the opportunity to look at multiple neighbor countries where new cables land, so that they can as well have more than one choice. And whenever you have more than one choice and there is competition, we expect that they will be able as well to get better deals, just to cross from the border the countries, transit just to the cable landing station or data centers where they can benefit from this new ecosystem that we believe is going to grow along the new cables like Equiano, like to Africa, or other cables that might be on the planning phase to serve the continent.
Thanks very much for that, yeah, and for the explanation that on how the consortium is actually structured. And then it is a cable that you don't necessarily have to make joint decisions within the owners and shareholders in the cable, but everyone acts independently, thus driving competition. I think it is key. Byron, so to expand on that topic of infrastructure a little bit, and given the fact that Seacom, I suppose, is no longer purely just a subsea cable system, but you have been expanding into land, terrestrial infrastructure, and other services apart from international wholesale capacity. How do you see inland infrastructure evolving, given the fact that we're going to have more and more of and probably lower priced international capacity available over the next few years in Africa? We still have bottlenecks somewhere, and in my view is that the main bottlenecks, or the main bottleneck actually now remains in the access network and good proper broadband connectivity to enough people and institutions. But maybe we also need to work on regional interconnectivity apart from just the subsea cables and metro fiber, for instance.
Yeah, and I think you started off this discussion on will these new cables that are happening, will this drive forward a new era in subsea cable construction? And my thinking when I saw your intro there was actually what I hope it does is drives more investment in terrestrial infrastructure within Africa, between African markets, and of course the last mile. But I mean, if you look even today, one thing that when I talked about the lower cost that some of these new cables bring, a lot of it is because of what Ricardo was saying. These are open access. There's a lot of the cable systems that are kind of consortium. They may land, they may have a lot of capacity, but in a lot of places, the onward cross connects or even getting access at a landing station, those costs to make use of that capacity. So yeah, I think what we're going to see, and we've seen it in South Africa certainly, is more construction of long haul, diverse route fiber. If you look today, you would pay just to get from Mombasa, where most cable lands, to Nairobi, about 25% of the cost that it takes to get from Mombasa to, say, London, which maybe sounds reasonable. And that's come down dramatically over the past 3 years or so. If you took that same thing and said, okay, what does it take to get from Johannesburg into Harare? You'd be paying about 5 times what you pay to get from Johannesburg to London. So obviously capacity cost in Harare is incredibly high as a result of that. So yes, there's definitely a need for more competition to build the long haul infrastructure and the access infrastructure. But I think one thing that these new cables will do is they'll bring a lot of the content and even the compute power and all the things that people, whether you're a consumer or a business, want to connect to. They'll be able to bring that onto the continent, which then even makes that regional connectivity more and more important. And you're seeing already developing kind of hubs in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Lagos, and maybe Mombasa, Nairobi, East Africa corridor, where neighboring countries will now connect into those hubs to get access to the content or the compute power or the storage or the disaster recovery. And I think that's why you're seeing the data centers also develop in those areas. So then Africa becomes more a continental market with more African connectivity as opposed to everything going up into Europe. But these cables actually provide the platform for that to happen. Because if you're know that if you're going to put a site up in Africa, you need to make sure you've got diverse, low-cost international connectivity to connect to the cloud that is the rest of your network. So I do think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more investment in long-haul terrestrial fiber around Africa and between African countries, and more metro fiber builds.
I'd like to add to that as well. I think one of the comments you made was the costs are high for connectivity, which I think actually is a discussion of the past now. I mean, if you look at the GNI, what it costs to buy data in, say, key markets like Nigeria and Kenya, it's below the 2% mark. So it is well within an affordability landscape. The discussion with all these investments that we're trying to solve actually is no longer, the cost per mega. This is the volumes, getting people to use a few gigs versus, what is a few hundred meg. So for all intents and purposes, it is well entrenched, and people, are using as much data as they need. The other slight thing that people often forget is there is possibly even some substitution happening, because it is no longer a substitution for staple issues in life like rent, food. That's how important data has become to a lot of these people. So I don't think it's any longer an issue of can people afford it. We are well past that discussion. We solved the smartphone issue as well, and as we've come to realize, even if it's $300, people will buy it because it's a fundamental, sort of pivot in life for them. So that's why I feel with all these different things that we're doing, including data centers, the subsea systems, the metro fiber, ultimately it's all being driven because consumers find value in all of these things, and they will, in the end, push a further investment in these things. And as long as that base, which is an incredible base of people, human beings will continue to consume. So I think the issues are no longer can they afford it. I think all that's done, finished. It's how can you feed that machine? I think that's really fundamentally what our role is today and what we're trying to solve. With all these people that are on this panel, and actually we all contribute in very unique ways to that development.
Well, maybe more I had in mind was places like the Central African Republic and Niger, etc., that are landlocked and have limited connectivity out of those countries, and as Byron mentioned now, Harare, where the cost to get to it out of Johannesburg is in Zimbabwe is very high. So I think that's the issue, and the issue of affordability, as far as I'm concerned, is more not whether you can afford it, because just about everyone can afford it that has some money, but it's what sort of quantity can you afford, and if you are going to be part of the digital era and environment and the whole ecosystem, a participant in it, it's no longer, well, I can afford maybe 10 or 50 megabytes a day, and that's it on my mobile. Can you afford to buy a gig or a few gigs a day, because that's what it may take for you to be able to be a web developer that is able to work for somebody halfway across the world to develop websites, for instance, and upload them. So that's the scale where affordability, I think, has moved to the meaning of it more into, can I participate in the digital economy based on the money that I have, disposable income that I can spend on telecommunications, on data. But very, very good points. And since we're on sort of speaking to data center guys, and Arthur, Angola Cables also has a data center, as does Seacom. In fact, we have data centers used. I mean, Arthur, from your perspective, how do you see the new cables and the new capacity, or in fact maybe the OTT cables per se, impacting on a data center environment in Africa in terms of the new capacity available, and there's been a lot of investment going to the data center environment as well, and do you see that growing on the African continent, or do you see it more as a threat? Ranjit mentioned that we used to and sometimes still do take traffic to Europe. I mean, will the new cables make it effectively easier and more economical to just take the traffic into Europe, somewhere, or Asia, have the data processed, then send it back to Africa, rather than invest in these data center infrastructures in Africa itself?
Mm-hmm. let me just start by adding something regarding the previous topic, where I do believe that that yes, so the subsea capacity is there. What Africa still needs to push is the terrestrial backbones and the specific to the landlocked countries, of course. And also, as you mentioned and very well, the questions of how much money the people have in their pocket and how much they could spend it. That meaning that, and connected to the data centers, that one of the things that Angola Cables have been working and trying to push is in terms of maintaining the traffic near the eyeballs, needing the usage people that need it, in order to make faster to access it and cheaper to access it than just going back to Europe or to Asia or to Americas to pick that traffic. In that sense, the movements I'm seeing in terms of data centers is Africa was a whole black area with none of the big boys of the data centers investing. I'm seeing that changing, and changing more about local players like Ranjit with Ecolo or Paix or other players that are really pushing and trying to make big efforts to build that data centers. And on the other side, we are seeing also the hyperscale guys opening their first positions. It's true that we started to see that in South Africa, but that will replicate in Nigeria, in Kenya, in other markets at some point, even DRCs or Ethiopia or other countries that have huge population, and there really needs to have that local ecosystems there in order to have cloud solutions that we really believe that in 5 or 10 years, most of Africa will make the same movement as the rest of the world. So I'm seeing with good eyes the investment that is being done, and I believe it's the right path to do it, instead of being dependent on other continents to make the digital ecosystem grow in Africa. So it really needs to invest. We need to have that content locally and being able to distribute it locally, for sure.
Thanks. Ranjit, maybe from your side, do you see a potential threat from the large OTTs, and not to hark on the OTTs, but do you see them potentially trying to vertically integrate to an extent along the value chain where they will have a lot of that capacity sitting on the subsea cables, and will maybe now start building data centers in order to also participate in that part of the value chain? We have Microsoft, Amazon or AWS having built data centers in South Africa and plan to deploy data centers in other key markets in Africa. I mean, what if Facebook decides to build data centers to store its own data and process it and its own content rather than using iColo? Or the likes of Google does the same, for instance, and Alibaba and who knows who else. Is that a threat to the data center operators themselves, or not necessarily? You see it more as a cooperation going forward?
So, I mean, the prerogative to decide whether you want to build on your own or you want to outsource is often based on long-term strategy and as well as specific market conditions. So I think as in most markets, and I don't think Africa is an exception, there will be some self-build that will happen. There will be certainly quite a lot of build that will happen with the resources, as in like us, mycolo. I don't think because we're Africa where they would treat us any differently. I think it's very market specific. It's a requirement. I think you will find companies will build their own infrastructure if there is no infrastructure available. So the onus is on us to first be there and be able to provide that market. I think if you look at markets like South Africa, as you mentioned, in addition to building their own, they're also buying quite a lot of capacity from parties that are providing data center services. So I think it's not an exceptional geographic situation. I think it'll behave more or less the same as what we see in Europe. So there will certainly be quite a lot of co-location build, but in addition, for certain key markets, I do foresee. So it's simply because I'm not sure that there is enough, there's enough reason for them to want to do everything from it's strategic, and it's also from a long-term perspective. So I don't see them eating into the value chain, and I certainly not in the next 10 years expect them to that we would have data centers from all the OTTs in all 52 countries. In a certain few markets, yes, but otherwise, by and large, I think you'll continue to see them sort of being there. They're also our biggest customers. So to a large extent, I think they're a healthy part of our ecosystem as well. So at this stage, they're certainly not competition.
Thank you very much. And we need to wrap up. Maybe sort of in conclusion, Ricardo, from your side, there are some concerns that once the large OTTs or cloud providers have their own capacity that they invested in on subsea cables, that will have a detrimental impact on the other existing cable operators because of two things. One is you will be carrying your own traffic and no longer possibly using as much capacity on other cables from other operators, or you may even start competing with them on selling infrastructure-based products capacity to third parties in competition with other cable operators. I mean, are you able to allay those fears and put them to rest, maybe on historical example of what's happened in Europe?
Well, I believe that we crossed that bridge when we started developing our own infrastructure several years ago, and we had those conversations with the operators. But if you see the example of Europe is really a partnership, cooperation to develop critical infrastructure. Of course, based on our needs, our large capacity needs, we own our own fibers where we can serve ourselves, our traffic. But still, there is a big part of the traffic of the wholesale market that is served by the wholesale carriers. And by adding our scale to new systems, we lower their cost and they become more competitive. So I believe it's a win-win partnership that we have seen in Europe, in the Pacific, and that we foresee in Africa as well.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you to all the participants. We didn't get to all the interesting questions and answers as usual, and I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to discuss the topic further. So thanks again to all the participants and the panelists, and certainly the entire audience, and wishing you all a good day.
Thank you, Daybek. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time and for joining this panel. This actually concludes the live content for this year's Capacity Europe. So really would like to send our biggest thanks to everyone who's joined the sessions along the way over the last few days. And I do hope that we manage to see you all again in person before too long. The final event for the day is going to be the Global Carrier Awards, which we're really excited about. So please do tune in from 1 p.m. BST to join this celebration and see the successes of the biggest projects and companies in the industry. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.